Hello and welcome to more history stuff. So today I wanted to talk about the Battle of Northampton in April 1264. So this is kind of the anniversary. Um, this was one of the key battles of the Montfortian civil wars in England between Henry III and Simon de Montfort. It's a little bit neglected, I think. The other pitched battles of Lewes and Evesham tend to hog the headlines. But Northampton was an important engagement as well, and well worth having another look at, I think. So I've got some notes in front of me which I'm going to be reading off, which is why I'm looking down, so bear with me. These are my notes from my own book, by the way, which came out several years ago. There it is, The Wars of Edward I. If any of you should be tempted to purchase it. So that's the hard sell. So I'll just run through some of the key facts about this battle. So this is in a fairly early stage of the Civil War in 1264, and it marks the point where the gloves really come off between the two factions, the Royalist faction led by King Henry and the baronial rebels led by Earl Simon. Up until this point there'd been shadow boxing, if you like. There'd been a lot of skirmishing, but no direct engagements between the main armies on either side. But in the spring of 1264, all that changes. As I say, the gloves come off. Henry, in March, he summoned the feudal host of England, and initially this was supposed to be for a campaign against the Welsh, but this is a pretense. Henry was using it as a cover to raise an army against the rebels in England led by Earl Simon, and he soon drops this pretense, and by late March it becomes clear he means to fight his own subjects. And in early April, he formally declared war by raising the dragon standard, which is quite interesting. This was specially made for the king, and by all accounts is quite a splendid, fearsome thing to behold. It's described as a splendidly decorated banner with jewelled eyes and a tongue, specially made tongue that seems to flicker in and out as the breeze caught the banner, and its eyes of sapphire and other gems flashing in the light. So if you can imagine the royal army marching along, and at the head of it this jewelled dragon or Draco banner. So the king's target was Northampton, which was at this time the most important town in the Midlands. It was a road centre that controlled the main routes from London to the rest of the Midlands, northwest and southwest England, south and north Wales. It was also an administrative centre of a large and wealthy shire. It had a royal castle, a large number of religious houses, a thriving textiles industry. So it's an important and wealthy place in itself, but also strategically it's important because the core of Simon de Montfort's support at this stage lay north of the Thames in East Anglia and the counties of the East and Northern Midlands. Northampton is very well placed to guard these regions, as well as block the king from joining his supporters, his royalist supporters in the north. So if he can take Northampton, then he will have effectively driven a wedge between his enemies. He will have cut them off from the south of England. Simon de Montfort himself at this stage is in London with his supporters, and Northampton is held by his son, Simon the Younger, Simon Jr. Confusingly, there's two Simons. What the late Sharon Penman, famous novelist, did was call Simon the Younger Bran to avoid confusion. I'll just call him Simon Jr. So Henry marches on Northampton at once. He raised quite a formidable army that included most of the chief magnates, lords of England. This included his son, Lord Edward, his brother, Richard of Cornwall, William de Valence, Philip Bassett, Hugh Bigod. They were respectively the Chief Justiciar and Justiciar of England. And there's also a massive phalanx of loyal barons from the North and Middle Welsh March. People like Roger Mortimer, James Audley, William de la Zouche, John Vaughan, John Grey. The one notable exception was Gilbert of Clare, very powerful Earl of Gloucester and Lord of Glamorgan on the Welsh March. Hugely wealthy and important nobleman. He's got manors all over England, Wales and Ireland. And at this stage, Gilbert, known as the Red Dog, had thrown in his lot with the rebels. Turning the page, pardon me. His defection was quite a serious blow to Henry, obviously because it deprived the king of Gilbert the Clare's wealth and manpower, his military resources. Even so, the king is able to raise quite a formidable army, and he marches on the rebel garrison at Northampton, which is led by Simon Jr. And along with him, he's got a man called Peter de Montfort, who is no relation to Simon, but is quite an experienced marcher baron who had recently defeated the Welsh near Abergavenny. Also on his side, you've got Baldwin Wake, a baron of Lincolnshire, William Ferrers, younger brother of the Earl of Derby. But otherwise, the rebels consisted of lesser knights and squires, men of no great title or reputation, bachelor knights. And they're simply described as a great multitude. How many there were exactly defending the town, we're not sure. One chronicler says there were at least 100 knights and barons present, supported by a great unknown number or rabble of soldiers, servants and civilians. There was also apparently a body of students from Oxford, pro-Montfortian students, who had been driven out of the town when Henry made Oxford his headquarters, like Charles I did several hundred years later during the British and Irish Civil Wars. These young students were apparently found to be fighting against the king with the utmost zeal, armed with bows, slings and crossbows, and they even brought their own banner, which they draped over the gates of Northampton. So Henry's army appears outside Northampton on the evening of the 4th of April, and then, as practical convention demanded, he sent forward his envoys to issue a formal demand of surrender, which is refused. These are the standard courtesies before a battle. So at sunrise on the 5th of April, Saturday, the Royal Army advances over the water meadows to attack Northampton from the west and southwest. According to the chronicler Thomas Wykes, they were driven on by a massed choir of monks singing a Latin hymn called the Vexilla Regis Prodiunt, a Latin psalm written by the Bishop of Poitiers, 6th to 7th century Christian poet. Henry III is a famously pious king of England, so it was very much like him to send his men into battle with monks singing in the background to urge them on. The first verse I've got in front of me, and it translates as, "The banners of the king issue forth, the mystery of the cross doth gleam, where the creator of flesh, in the flesh, by the crossbar is hung." I can't say that does much for me, and if I was a soldier charging towards the walls of Northampton, I'm not sure it would have filled me with warlike zeal. Not sure it would have put much fire in my belly, but perhaps 700 years ago it was much more inspirational. So the Royalist infantry, who are carrying ladders and hurdles, they attack the south gate of Northampton, and while they pin down the defenders there, a mounted column of knights makes a detour around the northwest section of the wall, the town wall. These men are led by Henry's son, Lord Edward, later Edward I, and Philip Basset, the justiciar. Their movements as they went round the flank of the rebel-held town were probably shielded from the garrison by a rise in the ground, so they take advantage of this cover. And then they charge a certain section of wall, and they open a breach. And this is done very quickly, which seems quite odd. How can you just break down a wall so quickly, especially if you haven't got proper siege equipment? And there was a rumour going round later that the prior of St Andrew's Priory, which is a religious house whose grounds occupied the entire northwest section of Northampton, there was a rumour that he had done a deal with the king beforehand, and he deliberately undermined a certain section of the wall of his priory, which was effectively part of the town wall. And he then told the king of the precise spot where this wall would collapse when his army attacked. Some English chroniclers called the prior a man of fox-like cunning, who was angered by Simon de Montfort, and his followers thought they were traitors. And so he deliberately arranged for the outer wall of his priory to be secretly undermined. This damaged section was then shored up with wooden props, which were knocked away when the Royalists attacked. Regardless of the truth of this, the wall does collapse, and the royalists pour in, and they find themselves confronted by just one man, and this is Simon the Younger himself, who was rushed to the scene to defend the breach. And he's apparently alone apart from his squire, a chap called Ingram Balliol, and these two together, they actually force back the royalist infantry all by themselves. Two men on horses. Gives some idea of the fighting capacity of armoured men on horses against foot soldiers in this era. They twice throw them back. The royalists attack a third time, and at this point Simon, he sort of blows his cool a little bit. He charges straight into the mass of infantry, where his horse, poor animal, is bleeding from all kinds of wounds at this point. It gallops much too far forward, panics, and hurls him into the ditch outside the town. But he's not killed, because at this stage, killing noblemen in battle is very uncommon, and the war hasn't yet reached a stage where that kind of noble bloodletting is taking place. Instead, Simon is dragged out of the ditch, scooped up by the royalist soldiers, and he's deposited in front of his cousin Edward, who is apparently delighted to find that Simon Jr. has not been killed, because they're cousins, they have shared kinship, and this is important. But the capture of Simon really rips the heart out of the resistance in the town. The rebels on the walls throw down their weapons, abandon their positions, and flee to safety. Some of them take refuge in churches or in the castle. One particular band of defenders under Peter Montfort's son, Peter Jr., just to make things even more confusing, they hole up in the castle and manage to hold out until the next morning. But Henry has won the battle. He has captured Northampton, and the king makes a triumphant entry through the south gate, while his troops set about the very business-like process of rounding up prisoners and systematically pillaging the town. There wasn't a great deal of bloodshed at Northampton. All of the rebel knights and barons found inside are taken prisoner, along with a lot of other lesser men-at-arms, citizens, people who've been forced to join the rebel army. And according to the various chronicle and administrative accounts, hardly anyone is killed. There's lots of ransoms. A lot of men are taken prisoner. And then the town itself is stripped of all its wealth, down to the last halfpenny, according to one account. Some of the wealthier townsmen who joined the rebel army, they're subjected to severe financial penalties. But it's all quite bloodless, especially for a medieval battle. It's a bit of a glorified brawl in the streets, really. It's called the Battle of Northampton. But it's certainly not a battle as we would think of one, on an open field with two sides lined up charging at each other. It's really an attack by a very large, well-equipped royal army on a provincial town that's defended by probably a much smaller band of Montfortian rebels. But that aside, it is important in that the king takes a lot of prisoners, including Simon de Montfort's son, and a lot of knights and barons. And it gives him a strategic advantage because he's captured this very important town in the Midlands. And it gives Henry a distinct advantage, which he then proceeds to exploit. In the following weeks, his army is able to sweep through the Midlands. They're retaking rebel-held castles and towns all over the place. Edward goes into Derbyshire and Staffordshire, where he devastates the lands of Montfortians. And for the time being, it looks like the royalists are winning, that they're going to win this war very quickly as a result of this victory at Northampton. It didn't turn out that way. It turned out to be a lot more prolonged than that, largely thanks to Henry's defeat at the Battle of Lewes in Sussex a few years later, a much better known battle. But that's another story, and one I'll probably come to in a future video. But that is my account of the Battle of Northampton. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you. Goodbye.